So it's a snowy night in Iowa on January 3rd, 2008. I'm setting the mood here. And my car and I are stuck in a ditch, miles from civilization. There's no cell service, and because I'm a 19-year-old, I don't have a jacket. And I'm there because I've gone to Iowa to volunteer for the Obama campaign with some other Tar Heels. And we were sent to Newton, which is a small town, about 15,000 people. It used to be the headquarters of Maytag. And my job on that particular day of the caucus was to pick up a voter who needed some help getting to the polls, take her to the polls, and monitor the caucus at the local high school. And we had gone out there, it was just me. Unfortunately, the car that I had been given by a local volunteer was imported from the Soviet Union and had the traction of a snowboard, and so I ended up in the ditch. And I'm about half an hour into trying to dig out the car when a guy in a pickup truck drives up. And fortunately, he has a winch. So he starts helping me pull the car out of the ditch. And he asks me where I'm headed, and I tell him. And it turns out he's headed to the Republican caucus to vote for John McCain. And so we have a long conversation as he's pulling the car out of the ditch, and he puts me back on the road, and we kind of head our separate ways. And I take the voter to the caucus. Anybody here ever been to one? It's this amazing event in democracy because it's like Red Rover meets voting, and people are moving around and yelling at each other and convincing each other. It's this incredibly celebratory, alive thing that's very unlike your polling place. And I ended up spending the rest of the year working on the Obama campaign around the country and in Chicago. And when I tell this story now, a lot of people think it's going to end up a different way, that he's going to leave me in the ditch when he finds out that I'm headed to the Democratic caucus. And this is because we're in a moment where the narrative is supposedly that we would not help our political opponents out of the ditch, right? The civility is gone and we don't have that era anymore. But local communities where you have to face each other, you have to meet people and sort of see them where you live on a regular basis, are where I think this narrative about civility and about our politics kind of fall apart. And I've been on sort of a decade-long journey now trying to figure out how do we use local communities to make those things stronger and help us bring back a deeper sense of civic engagement and connection. We're starting, unfortunately, from a tough place in that idea. Local election voting is half of what it is in national elections, and lower depending on the age group and so forth. And you have newspapers which provide the vast majority of original reporting about what's going on in communities in a long decline. And when we talk about this issue of local communities and information and participation, we often talk in particular about young people and the role that they play. They vote at lower numbers, they're less likely to read the news, and there's a sense, right, that, if you read the news, millennials are going to kill every industry, that people are sort of shifting the trends of all of this, and that we're not participating in the ways that we used to. And there's good reason for that concern, but I've read a whole lot of the research that's out there about this and consulted with media organizations around the world on how do you design better products for younger users. And my takeaway from all of it is that we tend to think about this problem wrong. We tend to think about it based on demographics rather than on behavior, and we tend to use this sort of built-in assumptions from out in the world to design what we do. And the reality is that newspapers have actually been declining in circulation since the 1960s. There's different trends about our behavior in our society that are shaping the way we consume information that go beyond just the internet or demographics. But nonetheless, we've got it in our ideas, that, in our heads, that we have to go convince young people to read the news and sort of reach out to them in new ways. And it leads to these kind of hand-handed efforts to communicate with young people and market to them in ways that don't make a lot of sense. As Clayton Christensen says, being 25 doesn't make you buy a product. You buy a product because you're trying to get something done. And we should be designing for that when we think about how do we build more civic engagement and more civility when we talk to each other. But what you end up with often are stories about people like this, right? Young people are speaking in code, they're eyeballing vodka, they're playing Fortnite, and you get this idea out in the world that simplifies this question into these giant groups that don't reflect reality. But you also get a lot of social science research that's pretty misleading. This is one that I really love, where one of the findings was millennials are motivated by the things they care about. And first you hear that, you're like, what an insight. And then you spend 10 more seconds with it. Everybody's motivated by the things they care about. But there's a lot of this out there in the world, and I've always been curious, what's actually underneath that, and how do people behave, and how can you serve people better as behavior changes over time? And when I was in my research summer in France, I mostly studied croissants, but I also talked to people about their media habits in Europe. And I met one young man who loved Le Monde, but he never read it. He read the tabloid instead because Le Monde was too big to fold while riding the metro, right? This drives journalists crazy because it has nothing to do with the content, but the form factor is wrong. It's those little kind of moments of design. When I was in London, I met somebody who said, I don't read the news, and then she paused and she was like, I know that's bad. She doesn't need convincing, right? But that's a thing we try to do a lot. We try to implore people or beseech them to care, but most people are aware that it's a thing you're supposed to do. It wasn't grabbing her attention. In Norway, I ran a workshop and I met a young man who spent most of his time on the Doritos Facebook page because he likes Doritos and the people seem cool. But he also knew more about local politics in Norway than anybody I met, including all the journalists who were at the conference. The point being, people rarely conform to your expectations or to the marketing groups that we put them. So I got interested in this a few years later while living in Miami. I was trying to figure out a new city in a new state that is crazy and trying to figure out where all of that fits and how this place worked and how to make a home there. And I convinced a few friends to do some research with me about what it was like to be a local. We followed people around on their commute. We went out for drinks with them. We took their kids to daycare. We just followed people and immersed ourselves in the experience of being a local. And we found some really interesting stuff. One of the things was this idea that the city was a work in progress, that I was helping change it. It was a project I could work on. That had brought a lot of people back to this place that they called home. And we see this in all the cities that we work in now. We also saw this idea of discovery, wanderlust, sort of exploring something new all the time. And this idea that every time I go out there, I can see something I hadn't seen before. It kept people engaged and wanting to get to know their city in a deeper way. But we also found that the news media didn't match up with this, that it actually caused people to feel behind and overwhelmed and bad at being a local, rather than helping them explore these motivations about being more connected to their community and finding something new and fun to go out and do in the world. And so we actually ended up starting a company based on this research and this idea, where we try to help people connect with their city in new ways. So we build media brands for local communities around the country. We started with the New Tropic in Miami in 2015. We send a daily email newsletter that helps people keep up with the news and events that are going on around town, and features a lot of voices and contributed content and stories from around the community. And we try to live at the intersection of the fun, exploratory stuff that makes it enjoyable to live where you live, and the substantive parts about what's the future of this community and what's it going to look like, a few years from now. And we live at that intersection and work on how do we provide that daily connection for people in their community. We're in 4 cities today. We're also in Seattle, Orlando, and Portland, and headed to 6 more early next year. And we build projects that are about helping people deepen that relationship to their city. In Seattle, after the 2016 election, we took people on a road trip to the nearest county that voted the opposite percentage of Seattle, which voted 90% something for Hillary Clinton. We found the nearest county in Sherman County, Oregon, that voted the same way for Trump, and did a day of exchange. We took about 25 people on a bus to Seattle, from Seattle, and they met and talked with each other for the day about what the communities were like, and shared stories about living where they lived and just understanding each other in new ways. And we found that both people on the end afterward reported feeling better understanding and more positive about their neighbors in this region after this kind of experience. We partnered with the transit agency in Miami to do an art contest to get people creating new kinds of engagement and new experiences in public places on transit infrastructure. And we build election guides that have helped many tens of thousands of people figure out who to vote for things like county circuit judge and all the ballot measures that show up on your ballot every year, where you don't know any of the details and it doesn't follow national party lines. There's all these little places where the information breaks down at the local level where we've been able to see you can make an impact. And all of it for us is about trying to bring that sense of community together and build those deeper relationships. And the thing I really want to leave you with is a sense and understanding of the power of those local actions that you might take in your daily life. Organizing a potluck, getting people together, having a discussion about something, volunteering. Those little actions make a huge amount of difference, and it can often feel like you're completely powerless to shape these bigger trends that are going on in the world. But we get to see every day the way in which that helps people decide they're going to stay in their community, they're going to find a business partner, they're going to launch something new, they're going to decide to raise their kids in a place they never thought they would. These kinds of little local actions you take end up having these incredible lifelong effects on our communities, and it's the scaffolding on which the bigger, more ambitious national stuff we want to do is built. So if you're interested in this, I'd love to talk to you more about it, but mostly I just want you to have a sense of how important those little daily local things you do are and how much they're going to mean for the next few years of our country. Thanks so much.